This episode of Radcast Outdoors is brought to you by PK Lures, Bow Spider, and High Mountain Seasonings.
Fish on! Hey, Radcast is on.
Hunting, fishing, and everything in between. This is Radcast Outdoors. Here are David Merrill and Patrick Edwards.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Radcast Outdoors. I'm Patrick Edwards.
I'm David Merrill, and we're in the great indoors today, and we're going to be talking about the great outdoors.
Exactly, and it's been a little bit, again, thanks for your patience with us. It's been a busy season. David's been running around. I've been running around, and now we're finally in the studio, ready to do another show for you, so it's good to be back. So
just in time for some hunting season. It's kicking off here in a couple days.
I was going to say, here pretty quick, you're going to be heading to the backcountry, right?
Yeah.
He's like, yes, because he's been out doing trade shows, so he's ready to go hunting.
If you're a Bow Spider customer, I apologize. You can call the office. The gals will take care of you. But as far as my phone, the voicemail's getting changed to, if it's September, I will call you in October.
I like it. I think that's fair. And today we have a special guest with us. I have my good buddy, Matt Good. Matt, how are you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's good to have you, man. So Matt, just so that all of you know, he builds custom rifles in his day job for Cross-Side Custom Rifles here in Riverton. But he's also on search and rescue. And so I was like, man, you know what? We should have you on and talk about all these cool things that you get to do and all this fun stuff. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun today to talk about that. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the things that, a lot of people don't think about is search and rescue until they need it. And so I know this year you and I got to work on search and rescue together.
Yeah.
I think the only time sportsmen think about search and rescue is when they're checking out Wyoming Fish and Game, and do you want to donate to Access? Yes. Do you want to donate to search and rescue?
And I'm hoping by the end of this, everyone, when they see the "Do you want to donate to search and rescue?"
give them $1
yes.
or two.
Yeah.
Click yes.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell us a little bit about search and rescue and kind of how it works.
Yeah, so in our county, we're all volunteer, and we work under the direction of the sheriff's office, so we're kind of an extension of them, a volunteer extension under their workman's comp and insurance and everything. So yeah, they're kind of who we answer to. And when someone's lost or needs help and we have the people or the equipment to help that person out or who they call.
So, with it being under the sheriff's office, I mean, obviously you have protocols and whatnot, but isn't it true that like all of the equipment, all of the stuff that you guys have, it's funded partially through the county, but it's also donations that people make, when they fill out their tags? I mean, how does that all work?
Yeah. And Fremont County's I think it's unique. I don't know how many other counties have 3 different individual teams. So we have the Du Bois team, the Lander team, and the Riverton team. And so the budget is limited, and it gets split between 3 different divisions.
But if you look at a map of Fremont County,
It's huge.
It is one of the biggest. I mean, we're going to get rid of Alaska, and they don't count up there.
Yeah.
But down here in the lesser 48, I mean, you look at counties. Fremont County is, if they had one centralized hub of a search and rescue, and you look at kind of the way the mountain ranges are and stuff is laid out, that makes sense.
Yeah. So our county budget gets split between 3 teams, and then it's all donated money from there.
And you guys have a benefit dinner coming up here pretty soon, right?
Yep.
So tell everybody about that.
Yeah. So August 28th, we're going to have a little banquet, a little dinner with silent auction, live auction, and hopefully some fun games. And we got a lot of neat prizes, helicopter rides, hot air balloon rides that'll be auctioned off. Yeah. And then all that money will go to the Riverton team specifically. We'll put that towards our training and equipment for the next year.
So what kind of equipment are we talking about? I mean, I know that I got to see the raft at the particular one that I was at, but what else do you guys have?
So we've got that rib boat that you got to take a ride on. We've got a pontoon boat. We've got a couple of 4-wheelers. We've got exposure suits for like cold water, swift water type stuff, ice rescue equipment, and then a decent amount of high angle equipment, ropes, the rigging and everything that goes along with that. I'm trying to think what else we have. We've got, a decent amount of medical gear. That's probably where we'll throw a little bit of our funding this year, is to try to get caught up on medical gear. A lot of that's kind of expendable or consumable type stuff that has expiration dates and goes bad after a while. And then the big thing as far as my goals is the training's the biggest thing. You can have the best equipment in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, you're not really any good to anybody. So
what kind of training do you guys do?
Mostly it'll be a lot of swift water training, high angle rescue training, like land search management training, just knowing how to run a search in the most efficient and effective ways. Trying to think what else we would spend money on. Every once in a while we go to man tracking classes. That's a handy skill to have. That's pretty fun sometimes. Man, I can't think of any medical training, of course that gear as well. So a lot of different training, a lot of different environments and arenas you find yourself in here in Fremont County. So,
and you're doing it all volunteer.
All volunteer. Yep.
I think that's pretty cool, don't you, David? I mean, the fact that we have a group of people that are willing to donate their own time is pretty special.
It's one thing to say, if your buddy's lost, right? But you get a call at 3:00 in the morning in January that somebody's lost, and that's a tough motivator to say, let's go out during one of our nice windstorms and it's 8 below and let's go. The snow's blowing tracks and it's not an easy, he's right here and we'll be there, or she's right here and it'll take 10 minutes. It might be you might start at 3:00 in the morning and it might be 24, 48, 72 hours till you call it off or are successful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's tough sometimes in the morning, early morning like that, and the conditions aren't great. It's like, oh boy, I've got to cancel everything I had on the schedule for tomorrow and probably the day after that. So yeah, that's probably one of the toughest things about, this whole program or organization is just dedicating the time to it, at the drop of a hat. So from my limited knowledge and exposure, one of the biggest things anybody can do is leave a travel itinerary, right? Yeah.
Where they were going, when they were supposed to return, right?
Yeah, really good idea. Yeah, that's one of the most helpful things for a search and rescue team is having a last place seen or an idea of where you're going or where you started. Especially if you have something like that can cut the search time in half or better, depending on the scenario. So that's super important. So yeah.
And you and I were talking about it the other day. One of the big things is PPE, just having, the right stuff with you, whether it be a flotation device or, the right gear when you're climbing, so talk about that a little bit, just preparedness.
Yeah. You mentioned flotation device. A personal flotation device is like one of those deals. I remember being a little guy and always wanted to take the PFD off, but I was always falling out of the boat, so my dad took care of me there, but that, it seems like some of the drownings we see every year, it's totally preventable with a PFD. And, you hear the argument that they're uncomfortable. It's like, well, companies have done a great job mitigating the comfort issues, where they don't even
nice now,
like the inflatables. Yeah. And, it's like one of those deals. It's, the most expensive PFD you can find are, $350, and they're the most comfortable. They're the best out there and they'll last you a lifetime. So it's one of those things now that I've been on the other end of this. It's like, I totally see the value and the ease and just how simple it is to prevent a lot of those lost family members,
So it's funny that you brought that up. I was just out at Lake Erie and, got to tour it's like the Great Lakes Museum. And so they have all this information on the old boats and on the old flotation devices. That's what got me thinking of that. And they showed one of these old flotation devices from, it was either the late 1800s or early 1900s. And all it was these big blocks of cork that you shoved down into this sack and you kind of tied it around yourself. And it works decently, right? But it's not anything like the stuff today. And then they showed you kind of after so many hours how far you would sink with that compared to today's devices where you don't sink at all, like they're impermeable to water. They resist all the water. So it's just kind of funny to see how all of that has changed over time. Also, the cold water gear, how that's changed, and the type of suits that you use, like when you do ice fishing rescues or, recoveries, it's a totally different set of equipment nowadays.
Yeah. Yep. And that stuff is, it's really expensive, but once you've been in ice water with it and then without it, you're like, I don't care what that costs. I'm going to have that piece of equipment. So we have actual ice rescue suits, and they're kind of like a cold weather exposure suit where they have insulation and flotation built into them. And that's what we'll respond into, like with most ice rescue scenarios. And then like our cold water, we have dry suits. They're like an uninsulated, basically like a Gore-Tex like shell, and then you layer up underneath of it. And you can use those in some really cold water too. So those are kind of our water exposure suits that our PPE that we use.
And so the donations pay for all of that, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and they're pretty pricey. Just to give you an idea, a lot of these dry suits run right around $1,000 a piece. And to make a good solid response, you probably want at least 6 team members suited up. And then you get a volunteer organization. And we've got guys on our team that are 6'5", pushing 300 pounds all the way down to like my wife, who's like, way smaller than that.
Tiny.
Yeah. So it's hard to get suits that fit everybody that responds. So you just don't know who's going to be able to show up. So it's really tough on a limited budget to get the equipment like that. But we're working on it. We're getting there.
So does the sheriff's department furnish your ride? Like, as far as like, do you pick up a vehicle from them, or do you volunteer that as well?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned, the 4-wheelers, they're kind of like some old Arctic Cats, and they're great little machines, but everybody's got like their fixed up side by side or their 4-wheelers that they trust. They got all their, hoists and jacks and everything they would want in case they got stuck. So they kind of stay at the barn, the station. But they do furnish us with what we call our command vehicle, with a radio and other county equipment that's really useful. So we use that pretty much all the time. It goes on almost everything, but it doesn't fit the bill for everything. Not an off-road machine, I guess. I'm trying to say.
Yeah. They don't give you a big Humvee.
No, no lift kit and big tires. No, but it's a good solid little ride.
Oh, that's cool. So how does that work? Like if someone is lost or, somebody's missing, what does the protocol look like for them to deploy you and your team?
Yeah. So a lot of times, like if it's close to town, sometimes they'll just send a deputy and see if they could just locate them. And if it's something that's a little more extensive or inclement weather or terrain where like deputies like, no, let's just call search and rescue. They'll call us out. And then we kind of make a determination on who shows up, what kind of a response we make. If it's that day, the time of day and everything else has a lot to do. If we go out that night or we wait till morning.
And some of that's that preliminary information of, hey, this guy's overdue and he went fishing or hunting or hiking, or no, this person was just driving from Riverton to Lander and didn't show up, right?
Yeah.
So maybe, the person that's just driving from Riverton to Lander that didn't show up, well, maybe they decided to run over to Casper for some reason, right? So that's really hard to say, okay, we're going to do an on-the-ground man search of that area, right? But if you knew to start with that, hey, I went hunting for 3 days and I was supposed to be back and I'm now overdue, that's a lot easier starting point.
Yeah, yep, absolutely. And then, like you say, all that information plays into, like we have search urgency charts where we can kind of put in the criteria and the circumstances, and then basically kind of have a formula that adds everything up and lets you know, like, hey, this is actually very urgent. You guys need to go right now. Or like you say, maybe we'll just give him a day and see if he shows up, sort of a deal. And then from there, we've got another kind of a neat little form called a Matson consensus form, where you can take all that information, where they were headed, health, mental acuity, everything else, takes that into account. And then you break your kind of your search area into, like, say 4 areas, and you kind of get a couple of people together and you do this evaluation form on which area you think is most likely to have them located. And it turns out, I can't remember in that class, they say like 80% of the time they find them in the high probability area that the Matson consensus form comes up with. So we've got some neat little tools and tricks to kind of get us pointed the right direction, if you will. So
is there like a school that does this type of training, or is it just like national type trainings that do this, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I think they call it NASAR, the National Search and Rescue. They put on classes like this. I've never been to any of their classes, but the few that I've been to have been put on by other counties that have brought in someone that was an expert in that subject. So do you collaborate a lot then with the other search and rescue personnel in the state? Like, do you guys just train each other? Is that kind of how that works? We seem to team up with Sublette County. They're always willing to help and come over if we need it. They're a top-notch group. We learn a lot from them every time they come over. So I've been to trainings that they've put on. They always invite us if they got something cool going on. So they're I think they're one of the best in the state, and probably the best in the state and always willing to help. So we'll deal with them. I haven't had a whole lot with any other counties. You bump into other counties when you go to paid trainings, so.
Right. So just for our listeners, because we've got listeners all over the world and all over the country, but so Fremont County is on the east side of the Wind River Mountains, and then Sublette County is on the west side. And so there's a lot of play in between the two because we have a lot of hunters, hikers, backpackers that go back and forth,
trails
climbers.
that go back and forth
yeah,
as well.
so it gets kind of complicated, and so I'm sure you guys overlap a fair amount.
Yeah, and there's a lot of times, there's the circuit towers right on the county line, and there's a lot of accidents that happen there, and sometimes it's easy just to call Sublette, and they usually have a helicopter on standby with long line and or long haul and short line capabilities, all kinds of different capabilities with the helicopter, and they can go in there and make it a really efficient rescue or recovery. So yeah, we team up with them a lot.
Yeah. And so you just mentioned the two words. So rescue, recovery. So for the listener who doesn't understand those terms, what does that mean?
So yeah, recovery is the worst case scenario that the person isn't alive anymore, and you're just bringing a body home at that point. Versus rescue, there's hope and chance that they're still alive, and you can bring them home safe and alive. So
I'm sure that also factors into some of the urgency too. Like I know, if you have someone who's still got a chance, you got to move even faster to try to make that happen. Right.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, because it is such a diverse county. David was talking about it's huge, but it's totally different terrain. Like we've got desert, we've got prairie, we've got mountains, we've got all this different things. So
you've got rivers, you've got lakes.
Oh man. Yeah. And hard water sometimes, you've got frozen time periods. So for you, what's been one of the most challenging things about working in such a different environment with just so much diversity of terrain and elements of the weather and whatnot? That's
a good question. I would say the training is probably one of the hardest things to stay up to date, and probably the aspect or the terrain would be the high angle side of things. That's something that's like really low frequency for our team, but super high risk. So it's something we don't do a whole lot. We don't get a call for high angle rescue a lot, but there's big consequences if something goes wrong in that. So that one's probably the hardest thing for us to stay up to date on, because to have certifications, you've got to have so many hours of training every year. And a lot of times it's, $650 plus per person for, a 2 or a 3 day class. So it's just hard to afford the training. So we do our best to maybe not stay up to date on certifications, but stay competent in everything that we do. And so that's probably the toughest one, because that's, again, ropes are something that they get old, they get bad, they get nicks and cuts and stuff you have to replace. So that's one that seems to be a struggle. Or not, I don't know if a struggle is the right word, but you have to stay on top of that aspect as far as the rescue goes.
There's just a lot of man labor put in just keeping the kit, the gear, the equipment up to date, certified, in working order, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we just this year we've kind of implemented a monthly maintenance program where we've got a date set every month where we go in, got a roster of people that go in, different months and go through checklists, make sure all our gear is accounted for, make sure it's in working order. So when we get a call, everybody knows exactly where it's at. And
you go to hop in the command vehicle and the tires haven't been rotated, or
right.
You've got a flat, you're no good to anybody at that point.
Yeah.
Right? And you kind of touched on a few things. As far as the depth and the breadth of the program, you got to have land nav, you've got to have first aid, you've got to have cold weather rescue, mm-hmm. You've got to have off-road driving capabilities, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about there's boat skills, so you're between just all around skills. You've got to have a lot of life skills, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, and a lot of knowledge in a lot of different areas. From knots to just ATV operation. I'm thinking about if you had a pheasant hunter around Ocean Lake or out around Boyson, depending on where they've hiked across, you're not getting a pickup to them. Yeah. And some of those creeks, you're not getting a four-wheeler through, right?
Yeah.
But we can't just that specific area right there, if you were to do a manned foot search, you're going to need more than your 6 responders to hike that and go find somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's kind of that's a neat thing about our areas. There's a lot of different terrain. We get to see a lot of neat places, and it's kind of cool. We have people on our team that are, like you say, navigation map experts, and then we've got people that are that sled, like serious about their snow machine stuff in the wintertime. Like they pay for their own training and stuff. So we've got people on our team that are really good at that. We've got people that are really good on four-wheelers.
Avalanche control. I mean, helicopter communication, right? Just training to working around a helicopter and doing that. There's a lot of little things that once you add it all up, it's a big book.
Yeah, it is. That's why it takes a whole team, like you don't want me on a sled. Like it's bad. And, but it's like I'm handy with ropes. I know my knots, I know my rigging. So it's like the team comes together, and it's like, it really does take a whole team to be effective. So, yeah. Yeah,
I was just thinking about that when you said Avalanche. I mean, we've got, Togety Pass up there. We've got all these places up around DuBois where people snowmobile and avalanches happen. I mean, it just is what it is. But then you've got, Boyson Reservoir with boats and all that stuff. So yeah, it's just incredibly diverse, like all the different things that you guys get to do and be a part of. And I think it's a very overlooked, probably in every state, the search and rescue teams and what they mean. Like I said earlier, when you need them, you need them. Like you want someone to come find you. You want someone to get you out of there if you're hurt. Case in point, the one we worked together, that terrain was horrible. Getting in there was extremely difficult on foot, which is a good thing you guys had, a boat that could get there and do the extraction. But I mean, it just takes a lot of skills, and it takes a lot of people working together to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, I don't know if you want to expand on just like seasonally, I'm sure you guys go through different things and different preparation. So what does it look like seasonally for you?
So as soon as the ice is off, or maybe even a little bit before, because people push, if the weather's, it's hard to guess if there's going to be ice one day or not the next. So, when the ice is getting ready to come off, we make sure our boats are ready to go, that we get them fired up. And it's the first chance we get them out and run them and make sure they're operational. Because boats they can be finicky sometimes. And then wintertime, we kind of push the boats to the back of the station and get out our ice rescue gear, make sure that it's ready to go. The high angle stuff, something with Wind River Canyon this close, and even the cliffs around Boyson, we try to keep that stuff year round. Everything's pretty much accessible, but, kind of forefront of the mind, make sure our training's up to date, make sure we're all squared away on that stuff. And the winter kind of poses a tough one for us, where we found a big hole in our equipment is the desert in the wintertime. Last year we had, I think it was 3 hikers. They were walking the Continental Divide, and it was right after we got back from our backpacking trip, and that big snowstorm came. And I think it was the first week of September last year. I don't remember how much snow we got in places, but it was a fair bit.
A lot
on the valley floor here, we got 4 to 6 inches. It broke all the branches off the trees. And I mean, where I went elk hunting, it was like 16 inches of snow.
Yeah.
Which is not a big deal if you're planning it in October or November, right? You're prepared for it and you're ready for it. And you know that any weekend we go out, it could be potentially right. But you go out September 4th and you're in your shorts and a t-shirt thinking you're going to have a 80-degree weekend, and one of these big black thunderstorms rolls over, and it's not the case.
Yeah. And so that's what happened to these hikers last September. They're out in, tennis shoes and shorts and get caught in a blizzard. And they were like in the middle of nowhere. The difficulty we had, or the problem that was posed, was you get dry dirt roads for miles, and then all of a sudden you've got half a mile of a 6-foot snowdrift. And so, like snow machine, you're going to destroy your sled running miles and miles of dirt roads. And then a truck, you encounter snowdrifts. Better be good with a shovel.
And rescue to get you out.
Yeah. So that's been one of our biggest difficulties in the wintertime, is the desert. And you guys have probably been out there. I've never been to Siberia, but if I had to guess, if there was a place kind of like Siberia, it'd be like the Gas Hills, Jeffrey City area in the wintertime, like just windy and cold. So, we've got our eye on something, but it's a little bit out of our reach financially. I don't know have you guys seen those Sherps? They're made in Russia.
Do they have tracks?
They've got big giant wheels. Like they're amphibious.
They go through the water.
Wheels,
Yeah, those are cool.
Yeah, we think that would solve a lot of our problems. But
what do those run?
I think brand new, they're around that $100,000 range. So,
but you could go anywhere.
Pretty
that
much.
situation that I was talking and I worked with you on, you could have gone there.
That would have been, it really would have been
anyway.
ideal. Yeah. Then we wouldn't have to load a boat. Yeah. They're just, they're pretty cool.
Yeah, those are cool. And they got those weird looking tires that are...
Paddle tires.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those things are cool. So
That is cool.
So yeah, we kind of half joke, but we're kind of serious. Like, we're going to figure out a way to get one of those to Fremont County, because that would solve a lot of wintertime problems for the Riverton Search and Rescue crew.
Like the Argos can do it, but that's an open cab and they're
Right.
like 15 miles an hour tops.
Cold, yeah.
Cold and slow.
Yeah.
Sherps are a little bit faster.
Well, and yeah, what's like here in the county too, you talked about ice fishermen like to push it on both ends of ice fishing, like early ice. So like I got to get out on the ice, so they push it a little too far and sometimes fall through.
Late
Late
ice.
ice, same thing. So I'm sure that would help in situations like that too.
Yeah. I've never trained with them, but yeah, you see them on YouTube doing stuff like that. So I'm sure we would figure out a way to implement it. But yeah, they look handy.
Or even the country up by Brooks Lake where you've got lots of little streams and, icy spots and boggy stuff. Like it would go through there, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And like kind of the other arena I thought it would be handy and was possibly some of the flood season, where you don't want to be tearing up boats and fences and stuff like that, where that might serve its purpose pretty good in a flood environment too. So
I think about where we've put a bear bait in before. You get snow drifts to where you really can't get the four-wheeler in there, but then you hit these creeks that are completely, unthawed and rushing. Well, you got a 4-foot drop down into the creek and then back out over 4 feet. You're getting a snowmobile stuck there as well, right?
Yeah.
So that thing should just be able to boop, boop, in and out. And
yeah. No, I spent a lot of time watching YouTube videos. I thought those were pretty cool. You'd have to go check them out. They're neat.
one thing I found interesting is, in Alaska, while you're recreating out in the state, considers you property of Alaska, and they pick up the bill for the search and rescue, right? So you go out there hiking, fishing, camping, canoeing, whatever, and you get lost and stuck and you call in the coasties, Alaska picks up the bill for that. Whereas here in Fremont County, that's not the case so much, especially, with as in regard to AirMed, the helicopters, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I have both of the flight insurances. Mm-hmm. And so if the helicopter has to show up and pick me up, at least I'm somewhat covered.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. And a lot of that, fortunately, I don't have to deal with the billing. The sheriff's department figures that out. And I think fortunately, if it's an honest mistake and, you just get caught in some bad circumstance, I believe, and I wouldn't quote me on it, but we've got like that $1 donation you fill out on your hunting, fishing licenses. I believe that goes to like the State Search and Rescue Council, and it gets reimbursed through like a Wyoming Emergency Management Association, I believe is how a lot of that goes, but I wouldn't quote me on it. But yeah, don't be scared to call for help.
Well, with where I'm going, I mean, I carry a personal locator beacon, right? Yeah. And kudos to you guys, you're doing a great job. But a paper note in the dash of my truck is not my primary go-to, right? That's not my reliant of, well, there's a note in the truck, maybe somebody will send the sheriff up here.
Yeah.
No, I mean, because I'm playing with knives and arrows and broadheads and bears and elk, and I mean, just fall down and stick a tine through your calf, right? Or just slip and stick a knife in your quad. I'm going to pull that thing out, hitting a button, and helicopter's going to show up overhead.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it happens so fast and so easy. You don't even have to be that far out of reach, and you are out of reach because no one knows you're there, right? So
I don't have cell service. I like to go where there's no cell service for a reason.
But Wyoming's one of those unique places. You could be 50 feet off the road. No one will know you're there because of, brush or whatever. There's that guy, I believe it was like a year ago, that had gone around a corner too fast up by Lander and had rolled off the side down into the ditch, and it took a few days to find him. I mean, those kind of things happen just because it's Wyoming. It's just not as easy as it sounds to be like, oh yeah, well, so-and-so went up this creek drainage. That could be 15, 20, 30 miles of creek drainage. And so now you have a pretty big search area.
Yeah.
We were following a sheriff over Santiam Pass in Oregon this last January, and he had his spotlight on, and he was scanning we were going downhill. So we were on the, kind of the ditch side of the road, if you will. It's a 2-lane road, but he was scanning the other side, and doing like 15 miles an hour. Now, it was really snowy, nasty conditions, but it was probably 25, 30 mile an hour roads, and he's doing 15, and I'm right behind him. He's got his flashers on. Well, what happened is because his spotlight was lighting up the trees so much, there was a car that had gone down over the embankment. We're talking down over like maybe 5 car lengths. But because I was paying attention and kind of like, what's this, state trooper doing? And I didn't have a light shining over there in the trees. He went past and I could see the trees reflecting red down there from the brake lights, right? So I had to sit there, and it took me about 3/4 of a mile to get him to turn back around because he was just lighting everything up looking and couldn't see it, right?
Yeah.
So we got him turned around, and thankfully somebody else they'd climbed out of it and got a ride down to town, and it was empty and nobody was there, but still it'd gone down about 120 feet and smacked into one of those big Douglas fir trees, and it was not it would have been a scary ride.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, I was just going to see if you'd share some of your better stories of successful rescue, keeping people anonymous, of course, but just some cool situations where you're able to have a good outcome. Yeah,
the most recent one is definitely those hikers on the Continental Divide, and that one was cool because they were so grateful. They were thank you, and it's pretty awesome to see someone appreciate your efforts. Because a lot of times they don't understand it, but those people definitely did. So that one was neat.
Were they like huddled down and out of luck and going to be stuck there when you rescued them?
Yeah, it was just blizzardy, nasty conditions, and they just didn't have the clothing, the attire to deal with that kind of exposure for very long.
Were they in shelter, or had they not even got
they had a tent, but like no insulation. Because it was, they've been hiking all summer, so.
And it wasn't like it was windy or anything.
No, yeah. Yeah, so that one was pretty neat. It could have definitely gone the other way, but dispatch was able to get a ping off cell phone, so we had a really, really good idea where they were at, and just everything lined up, because, a lot of times things don't line up.
So how did you mitigate the snowdrifts?
So we had a team member in this really awesome, like jacked up F-150, that like a rally truck, like a pre-runner type truck, and then a side-by-side, and they worked together kind of fighting their way through the snow drifts. And then they weren't doing so well. They were kind of getting their butts kicked, so to speak. We had another team member, I believe it's called a Scandix, made by Skidoo. It's kind of like a wide track sled. And he just kind of destroyed his carbides, his skis, getting in there. But him and another teammate went in on that, and were actually able to get to the victims or the patients, and the truck team and side-by-side team were kind of stalled out probably about 2 miles away. So they were able to they were able to catch up with the truck team and then get into the people that were stranded and bring them out one by one to the truck, and then obviously put them in a warm cabin and bring them home from there. So, yeah. But that could have been, I don't know if they would have made a night. They probably would have, but it's hard to say. It was pretty cold that night.
And it was windy. So, I had a chicken that night that didn't get into the chicken coop and froze to death.
Didn't make it.
So I can tell you it was brutal. It was cold.
Brutal.
I was glad we came off the mountain before that hit, because that was rough.
Yeah. Yep.
You guys came out like the second, and that hit like the fourth, right?
It was something like that. Like we came out Sunday, and I think it hit Monday afternoon.
Yeah. And the crazy thing, I think there was 6 other missions going on in the county at that time, because there was a bunch of people that didn't get out of the backcountry. There were the guys
I talked to at the trailhead that were like, "Oh, it's no big deal," and they went up, and they ended up getting pulled off too.
You told them, "You guys, have you checked the weather?" And they're
exactly.
like, "Oh, we're
fine. We've done this for years." I'm like, "No, like it's gonna be bad."
Yeah.
Patrick and I ran into another guy hiking the Continental Divide Trail with no bear spray, and I kind of told him, I'm like, From where we were at south, I'm like, not much grizzly activity. But from where we're at north, the next 40, 50, 60 miles, I'd be on my toes.
Yeah.
And we were telling him this, and then we turned around to point back where we'd come, and we saw a bear swimming across the lake.
200 yards away, like a minute later, there's a bear swimming in the lake.
It's like, you needed proof. There it is. But he still wouldn't take a can of bear spray, but that's the way it goes.
So my scariest story was I've flown in a couple different times in Alaska, bush plane, and get dropped off, right? And typically I have insulation and extra food. But we got we had a party of 3 and the plane only held 2. And we hunted in one spot for a few days and got moved to another spot. Well, they moved me first, and it got late enough. The pilot said, you know what, I'm not going to make a second trip tonight. I'll bring the other guys back in the morning. And while I'd left the sat phone with the other guys and didn't have a personal locator beacon at this point in time, I'm like, we got a sat phone in our camp, we're good, right? No. I mean, once we divided gear, and I'm like, well, you guys keep the sat phone and bring it with you on the second load. And day 3 came and went, and no pilot, nobody. And I started, wondering, well, did the pilot auger into the ground? Did not tell anybody where I am? Am I just out here and alone? And I mean, thankfully, finally, things worked out. He showed up, came out. But you talk about being 80, 90 miles across tundra, right?
Yeah.
And sitting there wondering, is anybody coming for me? It's not a comfortable feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever have experiences like that growing up here in Wyoming, where maybe you were caught out there?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. And yeah, that kind of what I was thinking of when you mentioned your story, where you kind of divvied up gear, and thinking about our backpacking trip last year where we had, a dozen guys. I don't know how many, there was quite a few of us, 9 or 10. And I before the trip, we were trying to mitigate weight and like split up stoves and stuff like that. And I kept telling the guy that was in charge, like, Ian, no, like I want to keep my own gear. I just can't count on anybody. And I always think, like, I've seen rescues or scenarios that start out like that. Like we had all the gear between 4 guys, and then something weird happens, and then you're out there without gear. And so like I'm probably annoying that way when it comes time for backpacking trips, because I'm like, nope, I'm keeping all my gear, and we need to stay together, stay in a group, kind of Mother Hubbard kind of a deal. But
I think that's okay.
Yeah.
Because if you do have something bad happen and you're split off from the group, it can really be dicey depending on what happens with the weather and a number of other things.
Yeah.
Wildlife.
Yeah.
We don't even have to have, a boulder roll down the hill and squish you, or a grizzly bear attack. You can just twist an ankle or fall wrong and get a break that punctures the skin, right?
Yeah.
And then you're, we just did a hike the other day, and I had the 2-year-old in the backpack. He's 25 pounds, right? That kicked my butt. One of you guys go down in the woods, I'm not carrying you out. It's going to take 4 guys to carry you out.
Yeah.
And it's going to wear 4 guys out to do it.
Oh yeah. Well, dead weight, right? Like when you're just like hanging there and you can't support yourself, it's hard to carry a guy who can't support himself.
But even if it's just one leg, and we got to do not even a fireman carry, you're just gonna basically do the potato sack race down the hill. That's gonna be, I mean, if you're talking about going in anywhere in the Wind Rivers, all those trails are just boulders and narrows, and it's not a nice gravel path.
Well, down by Medicine Bow Peak when I was in high school, we had a group come up from North Dakota. And I mean, they literally came up and then embarked with us on this trip. And they hadn't had time to adjust altitude or anything like that. And the next morning we went up on Browns Peak. It's like 10.8, I think, or 10.9. And we got most of the way to the top, and there were like 4 or 5 of them started to get altitude sickness. And I mean, it was scary. And I remember I carried one of the gals, and she was probably 110 pounds. And I mean, she literally couldn't stand up. Like, that's how bad it was. And that wore me out, man. And I was 18, great shape. I was shot after that. But I mean, just carrying another person is a lot. And I mean, she wasn't very big, but it gassed me taking her down.
We had a hunter here a few years ago. He'd been suffering. He's like, I'm just going to lay down in the tent. And the other guy's like, oh, are you sure? Let's take you down. He's like, no, I'm just going to lay down and sleep it off. And he perished. So It's nothing to play around with.
Yeah, we went and we got back down to Cheyenne. And I mean, Cheyenne's 6,000. I think they came from 1,500 feet, maybe. I mean, that's a big change to go up 10,000 something. But that's another thing people need to think about when they're going on these trips. You can't just jump from sea level up to Gannett Peak. That's not going to be a good idea. Yeah. Your body's not going to handle that. Then you'll have Sublette County Search and Rescue coming after you, right?
Yep.
That Sublette side, you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Unless they call you, right? And they're like, hey, we need some help.
Yeah.
No, it's good to talk about it. Again, I think the biggest thing for our listeners is make sure you support your local search and rescue, because it's not like they're finding money that grows on trees or anything like that. And it's us sportsmen who, we depend on you guys when something bad happens. And so just overlooking those donations is not a wise idea. You want them to be equipped. You want them to be trained. And again, these guys are doing it not for the pay. It's because they care about you surviving and getting you back home to your family. I mean, did I put that in pretty good terms?
Yeah, better than I could have. Yeah. Yep.
So what would you say, just like, wrapping up search and rescue, what advice would you give people, or things you might just leave in their minds?
And it maybe sounds cliche, but like being in the building power line, being in the electrical industry, complacency was always something we were trying to combat. Like, you get used to it.
50 feet in the air and 10,000 volts, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, you really have to stay on your toes and just be prepared for kind of just about anything, like it's like the life jacket thing, like, oh, I can swim, I'll be fine. But what happens when you go in the water when you're unconscious? Like, oh, it's August. I remember getting caught in the Grays River, deer scouting end of August, and it snowed like a foot on us, and it's like, you just never know. There's just a lot of things you don't expect. So I guess don't cheap out or wimp out on stuff that's going to keep you safe or save your butt in the situation you're not expecting. Seeing all these different scenarios and all these rescues, my pack tends to get heavy because it's like, oh, if this guy just had a compass, he would have got back to his truck. Or if this person was just wearing a life jacket, or if this person just had left a note, then we'd know where they're at. Just little things like that. So I would say, don't skip out on the gear and the stuff you think you might need. Just let people know where you were. I think that's the biggest thing, is getting your search and rescue team a head start on finding you.
There's a couple things that are always in my backpack, and there's a small Nalgene emergency, kit, right?
Yeah.
First aid, fire start, some other things. Another one is my rain jacket and rain pant. Even if it's early September archery elk and it's going to be 80 degrees, when I leave, that rain jacket and pants in there, because you know what? And I sometimes don't take the stove, but I always have at least an extra mountain house and some extra food, right? Because if it gets bad, I can put my rain pants and coat on. I can hunker under a tree and I can whip out a mountain house. And if I have to eat it dry and cold, I will. But yeah. I usually have, a few of those things. And that personal locator beacon is like number one on the list in my backpack.
Yep.
And if you break a leg and you got to spend the night, it would sure be nice to stay warm and not freeze to death, right?
Yeah.
Up there you could.
There was just one day, there was no emergency, but we were basically hiking through a snow cloud. It wasn't snowing, but it was over 90% relative humidity, right? And everything was wet, and it finally started to snow. We got about an inch of just really wet, nasty snow. It almost rained for a half hour and then started to snow. And we're hiking uphill and got sweaty, and I was cold enough, and we got to the top to rest. I'm like, let's start a fire. It took all the windproof matches I had, and my toilet paper started getting wet. It just took dry toilet paper out of the bag, and I was using pine needles and pitch sap, I had the fire going 2 or 3 times, and it just was wet and damp enough that it just kept putting itself out. And I was, by the time I got it going, my fingers were cold. I was cold. So,
yeah. So be prepared. Make sure to take stuff with you. Fund search and rescue as much as you can. Go to their banquets, do donations.
You did touch on one last thing, though. A map without a compass is borderline useless.
Sure.
A compass without a map is still useful, but the two together are really a good pair.
Yeah, and it's rare that we use maps in search and rescue. Everything's so much, GPS phone, but it's like you mentioned the fire starting. It's like you always have to have a backup plan because batteries fail you, things fail you. So yeah, backup equipment's always good. Always.
And so before we wrap this one up, I need to talk about our sponsors here a little bit. So, Hans from High Mountain. So High Mountain is a sponsor of this podcast. And I know Hans would tell everybody the same thing. Be prepared when you go out there. Be safe. But if you are going to go out and cook something this weekend or next weekend, think of High Mountain Seasonings. They've got a little bit of everything, whether you're cooking fish, poultry, pork, beef, elk, antelope, deer, anything that you've got, they've got the stuff for it. Right, David?
Now, if you're going fishing, if you're going backpacking, if you're going hunting, it's always nice to have a little bit of extra jerky in your backpack. Mm-hmm. And it's way cheaper and way better when you make your own. So I would challenge anybody out there that's on the fence about whether they want to try it or not. It's a pretty straightforward recipe to follow. It turns out pretty good.
Take our word for it. Go get a starter kit at himtnjerky.com. You can pick up a kit really cheap. It's good stuff. You can find it just about anywhere. Cabela's, Bass Pro Shop, Sportsman's Warehouse, Rocky Mountain Discount Sports, you name it, they've got it. So get out there and check them out. And then, David, tell us a little bit about Bow Spider going into the fall season and what's new with that.
We're coming out with some new products. It'll be late end of the year, probably first of next year, that we'll actually launch those. But as far as, having the capability to be hands-free, whether you're hiking or glassing, and then instantaneously access your bow. There's some how-to videos on YouTube, but the thing I heard all summer from, we were at all those total archery challenges, is a game changer, right? And you get fatigue from carrying a 4 to 6 pound bow all day long. Utilizing the Bow Spider, it's just another tool, but if you utilize it, the proper way, it really does reduce that fatigue down to minimal, and it makes our saying is, we don't make you a better archer, we make archery better.
There you go. So you can get those at bowspider.com. Check out the Bow Spider bow packing system and all the other great products that you have, because you've got quite a few new ones now. So go out and check those out. And then I'll end on this one, but PK Lures is another sponsor. I have not done a whole lot of fishing with my arm being messed up, but I have a lot of friends who have been sharing pictures, catching a lot of fish right now on the PK Spin-A-Jig. It's one of my favorites. It's a walleye killer. So if you're out after walleyes and you're a jig fisherman, it's a good one to have in the arsenal, because it gives you a little bit of flash with it too. So check out the PK Spin-A-Jig. And then, of course, it is almost jigging spoon season. And Matt knows this because his dad likes to use jigging spoons. But fall is a good time for jigging spoons. If you want to catch walleyes, trout, just about anything, perch, it doesn't matter. So go to pklure.com and you can pick those up. And Matt, it was really good to talk search and rescue with you. We'll do another episode talking about rifle business, custom rifles. If you guys can't wait for that one, you can go to cross-eyed
customrifles.com.
Boom.
Yep.
There you go. So cross-eyed-customrifles.com. Check out what Matt does. He makes some great products. And
what he does in his free time from search and rescue.
Yeah. So that wraps up this episode of Radcast Outdoors. Again, go to radcastoutdoors.com for more episodes, and you can find us on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. Thanks again.